Good morning, Dad. So we get into the meat of the book, part one, the lost pages. And this is where it gets really awesome. In the meantime, so tomorrow I'm going to be traveling, which means that you'll probably see me returning on Friday. I have a business trip, and I got to get up as early as I get up to do this. I have to get up to go to the airport, so you'll probably see me back on Friday. All right, part one, the lost pages. Chapter 1, the Ark of the New Covenant. On the night of September 21 to 22, 1823, 17-year-old Joseph Smith experienced 3 visitations from an angel who told of a long-lost book of scripture written on golden plates and buried toward the top of a nearby hill. The book held the sacred history of ancient Israelites and others who had sailed to the New World centuries before Christ. This book, Joseph would learn by later revelation, was destined to work a reformation that would restore biblical faith as it had been in the days of old. Footnote 1. This text comes from the March 1829 revelation to Joseph Smith and Martin Harris, now published in Part of the Doctrine and Covenants, chapter 5. The revelation was printed in full in the 1833 Book of Commandments and exists in a very early manuscript dating circa April 1829. Just 1 month after the revelation was given, the revelation promised, "If the people of this generation harden not their hearts, I will work a reformation among them." Italics added. The earliest text used here is cited in H. Michael Marquardt, The Joseph Smith Revelations, Text and Commentary. All right. And actually, that's an interesting thing. Another thing that happened on Word Radio was them discussing how the Book of Mormon was restoring plain and precious things that were lost from the Bible. And there's another book that's by some of the guys from there called The Key to the Keystone. And just like this is going in trying to figure out what were the 116 lost pages, the key to the keystone is what was the original Bible and Genesis that Lehi and Nephi had, and how is it different from ours? And that's a cool concept. So maybe that'll be next. I have that, and also in the language of Adam, which is about the temple symbolism all throughout all the scriptures. So that's another one that's on the table. Anyways, all right. The angel told him he would find the golden plates deposited with other sacred relics in a stone box that one early account called an ark. Footnote 2. John A. Clark, reporting on detailed 1828 to 29 narrations of the Book of Mormon, financier and scribe Martin Harris wrote of Joseph Smith's discovery of the plates. This book, which was contained in a chest or ark, and which consisted of metallic plates covered with characters embossed in gold, he must not presume to look into under 3 years. Clark letter to Dear Brethren, August 24th, 1840, in Vogel, EMD, chapter 271, emphasis added. The primary definition given for ark in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary was a small close vessel, chest, or coffer, such as that which was the repository of the tables of the covenant among the Jews. And another was a depository. The stone vessel in which the plates had been deposited fits both. Noah Webster's An American Dictionary of the English Language. Under ark. All right, back to the book. Though the story may sound singular, and to some fantastical, it was nothing new under the biblical sun. 24.5 centuries before this angel sent Joseph Smith to the hill to recover the Book of the Golden Plates, the Israelite high priest Hilkiah discovered the Book of the Law, or the Book of the Covenant, in the temple and sent it to King Josiah, 2 Kings 22:8, 2 Chronicles 34:14. This book was said to have been secreted by Moses some 6 centuries earlier in the side of the Ark of the Covenant, with the stone tablets on which God had inscribed by his own finger the 10 Commandments, his covenant at Sinai, Deuteronomy 31:25-26. When the young king learned that the contents of the Book of the Law, he lamented that his people had not hearkened unto the words of this book, to do according unto all that which is written concerning us. 2 Kings 22:13. Guided by a newfound Book of the Covenant, 2 Kings 23:2. From out of the Ark of the Covenant, the king carried out the Josian reform, a campaign to restore Israel's pure faith and renew its relationship with God. Josiah led his people in swearing an oath in the temple that they would walk after the Lord and keep his commandments, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book, 2 Kings 23:3. The book was intended to bring Israel into a new covenant, written not on a stone tablet, but on the heart. Footnote 3. Footnote 3 says, for Josiah's Reformation, see Kings 22, verses 8-20, chapter 23, 1-25, and 2 Chronicles 34, 14-33, and 35, 1-19. For the new covenant written in the heart, see Jeremiah 31, 31-34, and compare these with 2 Nephi 8:7, Mosiah 13:11, and Proverbs 3:3, and Proverbs 7:3. Now, that's an interesting one, because I think he's actually really right about the whole, these plates were in their own ark, and he'll get into it a little more. But again, I have a slight preview because of listening to Word Radio. But the other funny thing is that this Josiah Reformation may have been the point at which the scribes around the king were taking over, and they were trying to get rid of the plain and precious truths about a messianic physical representation of Heavenly Father here on the earth to take upon the sins of the world. But that's a different topic. But anyways, so like Josiah's mission to reform Israelite religion, which had been prophesied 3 centuries before his birth, 1 Kings 13:2, Joseph Smith's role in working a reformation was anticipated centuries before by prophecies in the golden plates themselves, and years before his birth by his paternal grandfather, Aziel Smith, who had a premonition that one of his descendants would promulgate a work to revolutionize the world of religious faith. Footnote 4. George Q. Cannon, The Life of Joseph Smith the Prophet, chapter 32. Cannon identifies his source as a document written by one who knew him, Aziel Smith, and heard him speak, evidently referring to Aziel's grandson, George A. Smith. Although this document has not been identified, George A. Smith left other similar accounts. See George Albert Smith, Sketch of the Autobiography of George Albert Smith, 101. George Albert Smith, August 2nd, 1857, Journal of Discourses, chapter 5, 102. Aziel's son John recorded a similar recollection about in 1839. John Smith, Journal in Vogel, EMD, 1/562. And Joseph Smith reported in his history, my grandfather, Aziel Smith, long ago predicted that there would be a prophet raised up in his family, and my grandmother was fully satisfied that it was fulfilled in me. My grandfather Aziel died in East Stockholm, St. Lawrence County, New York, after having received the Book of Mormon and read it nearly through. And he declares that I was very prophet that he had long known would come in his family. Joseph Smith et al., History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 2/443. Joseph, like a new Josiah, would inaugurate his work of restoration and renewal with another newly found book of Scripture, the New Covenant, even the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants 8457. So what I find interesting is if Josiah was the one where the scribes had taken over and were taking out things like prophecies of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament and the physical, corporeal, form of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament and prophecies like that, then the Reformation brought around through Joseph Smith in a similar way was to restore the idea of, hey, we knew Jesus Christ and we knew he was going to be physically there and physically talking about how we are made in his image and he would take upon the sins of everyone. And so it's kind of interesting in that regard. Anyway, again, subject for another time. But anyways, sacred things. Joseph found this new book of the covenant on the morning after the angel's appearance. Climbing the hill, he would come to call Cumorah to the place the angel had indicated. Joseph pried up a large stone that proved to be the lid of the stone vault or ark. Inside, he found a collection of artifacts that the Book of Mormon calls sacred things. See Alma 3747. Treasures similar in form and historical function to the regalia of a political dynasty and the relics of a temple priesthood, such as the holy things of the biblical tabernacle and temple. Most prominent among the artifacts in the stone box were the plates, which appeared to be made of gold, reversing the composition of the biblical sacred book and its box, basically meaning that, so it's reversing it because in the original ark, the ark was, I might mention it here. Yeah, let me just read that. Mount Sinai's tablets were of stone and laid in an ark of gold. The hill Cumorahs were of gold and laid in an ark of stone. The plates, witnesses reported, were partly sealed shut and were engraved with hieroglyphics, in the grooves of which was a black hard stain that contrasted the characters against the golden page. Footnote 5. Orson Pratt, January 2nd, 1859, Journal of Discourses, Chapter 7, 30 through 31. A similar description was given by Francis Gladden Bishop. The characters are rubbed over with a black substance so as to fill them up in order that the dazzling of the gold between the characters would not prevent their being readily seen. Francis Gladden Bishop, an address to the sons and daughters of Zion scattered abroad through all the earth, 48. While Bishop claimed that to base his description on a vision of the plates, his understanding of the plates' appearance was undoubtedly informed by his close association with Martin Harris. According to one of these witnesses, the prophet's father, Joseph Smith Sr., the volume's back plate detailed an alphabet of its characters. That's cool. Footnote 6, Fayette Lapham, interview with the father of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet 40 years ago, his account of the findings of the sacred plates. Charles Anton, according to one of the witnesses, Charles Anton, who was shown a facsimile of this backplate, recognized in its characters like those of multiple alphabets and described it as decorated with various delineations of sun, moon, stars, etc. Footnote 7, Charles Anton to William E. Vilbert, August 2nd, 1844. The Golden Book's title page, or front cover, displayed symbols in which the prophet's father tantalizingly perceived the Masonic implements, referring at minimum to two symbols that are indispensable to Masonry and have an ancient providence before it, the compass and the square. Footnote 8. Notably, some scholars argue that Joseph Smith Sr., who related this description of the Masonic implements on the golden plates, was himself a Freemason. See Cheryl L. Bruno and Joe Steve Swick III, Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration. For the ancient providence of the compass and square as symbols and architectural tools, see Hugh Nibley, Temple and Cosmos, 167 through 304. I told you it's getting good. Resting on top of the symbolically inscribed plate were what Joseph would learn from the Book of Mormon to call the interpreters. See Ether 4:5, Mosiah 28:20. Footnote 9, Lapham Interview in Vogel, EMD 1:462. Joseph Smith Sr. reportedly described the interpreters resting on top of the plate inscribed with compass and square and under a lid. His interviewer, Fayette Lapham, understood this lid to be a lid or cover on the book of plates, a protective and apparently blank top plate. Lapham reports that both the back plate and second plate on which the interpreters were engraved, on which the interpreters sat, were engraved, but he says nothing about the engravings or the other details on the lid plate, other than that the interpreters lay under it. Other accounts of the plates say nothing of a blank top plate or a protective lid over the plates other than the lid of the stone box in which they were found. It is most likely this top stone of the box, or rather than to a protective top plate of the book, that Joseph Smith Sr.'s description referred. On this most probable understanding, the plate inscribed with compass and square was the top plate of the set, and the interpreters sat on top of this plate immediately under the lid of the box. So basically, you're saying that there's kind of some debate about what lid they were referring to, whether it's the lid of the stone box or whether it's the very first blank plate, but it's probably that blank plate that wasn't really blank. It had the inscriptions of that square and the compass, and it was the interpreters that rested upon those. All right. Through these, talking about the interpreters, he would later translate or interpret the book from the plates. The interpreters were a pair of crystalline lenses with an associated breastplate. After Joseph first brought the interpreters home, he held the object out to his mother, Lucy. Lucy took the article in my hands and examined it, testifying later, I have seen and felt also the Urim and Thummim. In her history, Lucy also related that her son handed me the breastplate wrapped in a thin muslin handkerchief, though through which she could see the glistening metal and feel its proportions. She would therefore testify to a Nauvoo visitor, I have likewise carried in my hands the sacred breastplate. Footnote 10. Henry Caswell, The City of Mormons, or 3 Days at Nauvoo, in 1842, 26. Living and Fielding Anderson, E.D. Lucy's book, a critical edition of Lucy Mack Smith's family memoir, 389 to 90. It is likely that Joseph's father, Joseph Smith Sr., enjoyed a similar privilege of examining these Nephite relics, making Lucy's descriptions of the relics, and likely those of Joseph Sr. as well, the most accurate in the historical record. Joseph Sr. reportedly described the lenses of the interpreters as diamonds, which likely refers to crystals having a diamond-like appearance. Footnote 11, from Lapham Interview in Vogel, EMD 1:462. Supporting this understanding, Lucy similarly characterized them to a Nauvoo visitor, noting that they resemble two large bright diamonds. Footnote 12, Caswell, City of the Mormons, or 3 Days at Nauvoo in 1842, 26. Emphasis added. In her history, she describes them more fully in her history as two three-cornered diamonds that were framed in silver and connected with each other in much the same way as old-fashioned spectacles. footnote 13. Anderson, Lucy's book, 379. See also Mosiah, 28:13, Joseph Smith's History, 135. In an interview 15 years after Lucy's account, Martin Harris reportedly described the interpreters as round. Yet this same interview has Harris also described them as white like polished marble with a few gray streaks and not so thick at the edges. And he says, never dared look into them by placing them in the hat. Details suggesting that either Martin conflated the Nephite interpreters with Joseph Smith's other seer stones, or the interviewer conflated them and combined Martin's descriptions of separate seeing instruments into a single garbled hybrid. One of those stones was egg-shaped, the other was white, flecked with other colors, matching the descriptions of the interpreters given by Harris. Both seer stones were often placed in Joseph's hat to exclude external light. The interpreters, as described in chapter 3, were used differently. A final, and I believe decisive indication that the 1859 interview text describing the stories of the interpreters was actually based on Joseph's seer stones is that Martin here speaks of the stones in question as the stones to which he had access, stones he could place in the hat if he dared. While this accurately describes both Joseph's seer stones, which Martin saw on a routine basis and sometimes handled, it does not accurately characterize the interpreters, which, like the biblical temple relics, were considered too sacred for Joseph to be shown to or used by unauthorized persons. As reported in the Book of Mormon itself, the things are called interpreters, and no man can look into them except he be commanded, lest he should look for that which he ought not, and he should perish. Mosiah 8:13. For a description of Joseph Smith's use of the seer stones, see chapter 3. For the Harris interview, see Mormonism, number 2, 163 through 70. So, it seems to me like he's saying that what's what he calls the interpreters are the ones that are the spectacle-likes ones, and then the seer stones are separate from that. And the interview that conflated the two is where there's a lot of problems that come up with figuring out, well, what did Joseph Smith use? Well, it seems to me like he used both, but I guess I'll learn more about it here. So, they could be attached to a breastplate, also contained in the box by a rod, which held them in front of the user's eyes. Footnote 14, Anderson, Lucy's book, 379. See also William Smith's interview with J.W. Peterson and W.S. Ponder, 1921. The interpreters closely paralleled two of ancient Israel's temple artifacts, the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments and the biblical Urim and Thummim. As the Book of Mormon would unfold, the story of the interpreters to Joseph Smith, when he translated it, they were given to the brother of Jared, a founder of the Jaredites, whose exodus from the Tower of Babel in about 2000 BC led them to their promised land in the New World. Like the inscribed stone tablets in the Ark of the Covenant, the Jaredite interpreters had been given by the hand of God on a mountaintop and hallowed by the touch of his finger. The interpreters also were equivalent in structure and function to the biblical Urim and Thummim, which similarly consisted of a pair of stones attached to a breastplate worn in the temple by the high priest who consulted it to learn God's will. Footnote 15. For the function of the biblical Urim and Thummim, see Cornelius Van Darn, the Urim and Thummim, a means of revelation in ancient Israel. Each lens of the spectacles of Joseph Smith found with the plates was an interpreter or seer stone that amplified the abilities he had as a seer. Joseph had previously obtained two other seer stones of lesser splendor and scope, but identical function: a white stone from near the shore of Lake Erie, to which he had been led by a vision, and a brown stone, which he recovered while digging a well for his Manchester neighbor, Mason Chase. To distinguish these later two stones from the two he found in the stone box, we will hereafter refer to the stones from the box as interpreters, and aptly the term seer stones to only the stones he found at Lake Erie and Chase Well. There was a footnote 16 in here. For the significance of Joseph Smith's white seer stone, see Don Bradley, Joseph Smith's First Vision as Endowment and Epitome of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, or Why I Came Back to the Church. The identity of Joseph's white stone as the one recovered by Lake Erie and the significance of this stone will be further discussed in the author's work in progress, provisionally titled Acquiring an All-Seeing Eye, Joseph Smith's First Vision as Seer Initiation and Ritual Apotheosis. An equally curious instrument Joseph found in the stone vault was a brass ball with 2 spindles, an instrument in the Book of Mormon would call the Liahona, and described as functioning like a compass. See 1 Nephi 16:10, 2 Nephi 2:512, Mosiah 1:16, Alma 37:38. Finally, also within the stone box was a sword, which the book would designate the Sword of Laban, Mosiah 1:16, an ironic homage to the previous owner whose head it had removed. When Joseph eagerly attempted to remove these relics, he was repulsed by an unseen force and told by the reappearing angel that he could not yet obtain them, but must come back 1 year later. Like the biblical high priest, who accessed the Ark of the Covenant behind the veil of the Holy of Holies once each fall on the Day of Atonement, Joseph was to visit the sacred depository in the hill Cumorah on the same day every year, at the autumnal equinox. Footnote 17. For the high priest visiting the ark annually on the Day of Atonement, see Leviticus 16, especially verses 12 through 13 and 29 through 34. Purification. I'll read one more section here. Joseph visited the sacred repository at the opening of each autumn in 1824, 1825, and 1826, each time a year older and wiser, but still forbidden to take the plates into his custody. Why the delay? On Joseph's first visit to the hill, the divine messenger told him that he was not yet sufficiently purged of worldly motives, such as the desire for material benefit. A large quantity of gold within reach would seem like a dream come true for a boy from an indigent farm family. Despite his family's hard work, farm life was inherently insecure, as the young Joseph knew too well. Within his own memory, he would have seen the year-long volcanic winter of 1816, the year without a summer, and the consequent crop failure that caused what has been called the last great substance crisis in the Western world. Footnote 18 says, John D. Post, Last Great Substance Crisis in the Western World, the 1816 climate change and famine are believed to have been caused principally by the colossal eruption at Mount Tambora, Clive Oppenheimer, climatic, environmental, and human consequences of the largest known historic eruption, Tambora volcano in Indonesia, 1815. See pages 230 to 259. This famine threatened the mass starvation in the northeastern United States and forced the Smith family's exodus from New England to western New York. The material woes Joseph experienced were compounded by the nation's first serious financial panic, or depression, during which the teenager would have seen the pages of Palmyra's newspaper fill with notices of foreclosure against farm families like his. Footnote 19. The Smiths would lose their farm to foreclosure soon after Joseph's third visit to the hill in 1825. For a classic study of the depression of the late 1810s and early 1820s, see Murray and Rothbard, The Panic of 1819, Reactions and Policies. The desire to escape poverty and backbreaking labor of the farm motivated some to supplement their daily farm labor with nighttime quests for buried treasure, a venture for which they reaped only a harvest of irony, more backbreaking labor. These dreams of buried treasure offered a window into the quiet desperation of people like the Smiths, who tried to extract a stable living from ground cursed with instability. By 1825, as Joseph Smith was entering manhood, he became involved with a band of such money diggers who embraced him in the hope that his reported special gifts would prove useful to their quest. Footnote 20. Joseph Smith's involvement in treasure searching is well documented. See, for example, Richard L. Anderson, The Mature Joseph Smith and Treasure Searching, 498 to 560. Ronald W. Walker, Joseph Smith, A Palmyra Sierra, 461 to 72. Ronald W. Walker, The Persisting Idea of American Treasure Hunting, 427 to 59. And Richard Lyman Bushman, Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling, 48 to 52. All right, and in the fall of 1825, he was hired to go to Harmony, Pennsylvania, on the New York-Pennsylvania state line to help well-to-do farmer Josiah Stowell search for a reputed lost Spanish silver mine. When later asked about his treasure searching, Joseph Smith, writing as editor for the Elders Journal, did not deny it. Rather, in response to the frequently asked question, "Was not Joe Smith a money digger?" he answered, probably thinking of his employment with Stowell, "Yes, but it was never a very profitable job to him, as he only got $14 a month for it." Footnote 21 says, this question and its answer were published by Joseph Smith as an editor of the Elders Journal. See Joseph Smith, Elders Journal. Joseph Smith Sr., Jr., Joseph Smith Jr., editor, page 42 to 44. Being in the frequent company of money diggers would do little to heighten the poor adolescent's focus on the spiritual wealth within a book of golden plates, but Joseph's vision had attested that the plates and his gift had much more than a mundane value. By the winter of 1826, he was reportedly mortified that his divine gift should have been put to such a banal and superficial use. Footnote 22. Joseph Smith Sr. is reported to have said that he and his son Joseph Smith Jr. were mortified that this wonderful power which God had so miraculously given him had been hired out for pecuniary use. W.D. Purple, Joseph Smith, the originator of Mormonism, Historical Reminiscences of the Town of Afton, in Vogel, EMD, 4-135. He soon left Stowell's employment to follow in the steps of another Josiah, though he retained for a time his associations with those who continued to dig. Joseph, now 20, abandoned quests for material treasure and fully prepared himself to acquire the sacred book of plates. During or after his fourth visit to the hill on September 22, 1826, the angel directed Joseph to a companion better suited for a future prophet, Emma Hale. Joseph had met Emma in Pennsylvania in 1825, when boarding with her family while he was employed by Josiah Stowell. Stowell or Stowell? Sorry if I get it wrong. The angel told Joseph that in order to obtain the plates on his final visit to the hill, he must bring Emma with him as his wife. Footnote 23. Henry Harris, Sacrament, 252. Lapham Interview in Vogel, EMD, 1-462. Kyle R. Walker, Catherine Smith Salisbury, Recollections of Joseph Smith's Meeting with Moroni, 14-15.